Okay, so we're diving into something really interesting today based on a suggestion from one of you guys, which, by the way, we love getting those, so keep sending them our way.
Definitely, yeah.
So you said in this YouTube video called Stop Thinking, Start Talking, Learn English with Podcast, Conversation English Podcast.
Catchy.
Yeah, it definitely catches your attention.
Yeah.
And it's from this channel called Easy English Talk.
Okay. Hey.
And it's really targeted towards people who are learning English, specifically helping them become more fluent, more confident speakers, you know.
Big one. A big one.
Huge.
A lot of people struggle with this.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this kind of generally before on the show, but I thought since we have this like specific resource targeted towards English learners, and I know a lot of our listeners are are English learners, we could really do a deep dive on like what this particular video has to say and kind of like, you know, pick out some of the gems and share them with everybody.
Yeah. Extract the key advice, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so just to kind of like frame it a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, the idea, as the title suggests, is to stop thinking so much and just start talking, you know?
Which is easier said than done.
Way easier said than done.
If you are trying to learn English, like, there are so many things that go through your head, you know?
Right, there's the grammar.
Yeah, the grammar.
There's getting the pronunciation right.
Oh, yeah. And feeling like, you know, you have to kind of have it perfectly formed in your head before you can let it come out of your mouth.
Exactly. And then that leads to all sorts of anxieties, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like you said, it's way easier said than done to just stop thinking and start talking, you know?
And I think what this video gets at, which I think is really nice, is like some of the specific anxieties that people feel, you know?
Right, right.
Like the fear of making mistakes, the fear of not being understood.
But sounding, you know, silly or...
Yeah, sounding silly.
Or, yeah.
Like sounding like you don't know what you're talking about.
Right, right.
I think we can all relate to that.
Definitely, definitely. And, you know, the thing that the video emphasizes, you know, right from the start is that fluency doesn't come from, like, being perfect, you know?
Right.
It comes from actually speaking and practicing.
Because that's how you train your brain, essentially, to become more fluent, right?
Exactly. It's like any skill, you know?
Yeah.
You don't get better at playing piano by reading about it.
Totally. Or even by, like, staring at the piano.
Right.
You have to play. You have to actually move your fingers and hit the keys.
Right, exactly.
And it's the same with speaking, you know? You have to actually speak, you know, to become more fluent.
Right. Okay, so let's dig into, like, why is overthinking such a problem for so many people who are learning English?
Well, I think, you know, the video does a good job of laying out some of the main reasons. And I think one of the big ones is, you know, is this fear of making mistakes. This fear of being judged.
Right. And, you know, it's so interesting because, like, we native speakers make mistakes all the time, you know?
We do, all the time. And I think there's this kind of false assumption among a lot of language learners that native speakers just, like, never make any mistakes.
Yeah, that we just always speak perfectly.
Yeah.
You know, we get our grammar right every time.
Yeah, we never fumble over our words.
We always use exactly the right word.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so not true. But I think when you're learning a language, you kind of have this idealized image of what a native speaker sounds like.
Right, like this kind of like, you know, model of perfection.
Right, yeah, exactly. This kind of like textbook, you know, speaker who doesn't even exist, you know.
Right.
But that's one of the biggest fears, right?
It is.
Like worrying about those mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a natural fear, right? You don't want to sound, you know, foolish or incompetent, but, you know, the truth is everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers. And in most cases, those mistakes don't really affect the communication.
Right. The other thing that the video talks about is like this reliance on translation.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like if you're trying to speak English and you're in your head translating from your native language word for word, you know, that's going to
slow you down.
Really slow you down.
Yeah. It's a huge roadblock to fluency.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're not really thinking in English, you know, you're thinking in your native language and then trying to convert it, which, you know, it just doesn't work very well.
It just doesn't work. And it's really frustrating too, right?
Oh, it's incredibly frustrating because by the time you've translated everything in your head and come up with the, quote, perfect sentence, you know, the conversation has moved on.
Yeah. You've missed your moment, basically.
You missed your moment.
Yeah.
And then you feel even more self-conscious and hesitant to speak again.
Right.
So it can become this vicious cycle.
Yeah. And, you know, the other thing you talked about, which I thought was really insightful, was this idea of confidence. Like, you know, if you don't feel confident about your English,
right,
you're less likely to speak.
Yeah, you avoid speaking.
You avoid speaking.
Because you're afraid of making mistakes, you're afraid of not being understood.
Right.
And then the less you speak, the less confident you become.
Yes, exactly. It's that, you know,
that vicious cycle again.
that negative cycle, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so the video, you know, it doesn't just focus on the problems. It actually gives a lot of really, like, concrete advice.
It does, yeah. It offers solutions.
Yeah, like how to overcome this, you know, hesitation and this fear, and how to become more fluent.
Yeah, and I think the central message is this.
Huh?
Fluency comes from practice.
Right. That's the core of it.
That's the core of it.
Just speak, speak, speak.
Yeah. It's like, you know, how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Practice, practice, practice.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, and the video gives this really nice analogy of how babies learn to talk.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
You know, babies don't sit down with a grammar book.
No.
They don't, you know, study verb conjugations.
They're not memorizing vocabulary lists.
No, they listen and they repeat.
They just absorb it.
Yeah, they absorb it. And they make tons of mistakes.
All the time.
Yeah.
But they don't get discouraged.
You just keep going.
They just keep going.
And eventually they start speaking fluently.
Exactly, exactly. So the idea is that, like, adults can kind of tap into that same process, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that means, like, prioritizing speaking over, like, you know, perfection.
Right, like getting the words out, even if they aren't perfectly formed.
Exactly, exactly. It's almost like speak first.
And then fix later.
Yeah, which feels a little bit backwards, right?
It does.
But it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about, like, building fluency.
Yeah, it's like building a muscle.
Yeah.
You know, you have to use it to make it stronger.
And the video also made a really good point about, like, you know, native speakers aren't actually as judgmental as learners often think they are.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, most native speakers, they really just want to communicate.
Right.
They want to understand what you're saying.
Right, right.
And honestly, they probably don't even notice most of the little mistakes that learners make.
Right, they're not, like, sitting there analyzing your grammar.
Yeah.
They're just trying to, you know,
follow the conversation.
follow the conversation, exactly.
Like connect with you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And I think this ties into the whole idea of confidence too, right? Like the more confident you are, the more natural you're going to sound.
Absolutely.
And, you know, even if you make a few mistakes, if you speak with confidence, people are going to be more likely to listen to you and to engage with you.
Totally.
And that positive feedback, that can really help to boost your confidence even further.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so the video gives a lot of, you know, concrete tips, like practical advice on how to, like, stop overthinking.
Yeah, yeah.
And start talking. So let's walk through some of those, you know, key tips.
Okay, so one of the big ones, and this is something we've touched on, is to try to think directly in English.
Right.
Rather than translating from your native language.
Right. So, like, for example, they gave this great example in the video, like, just narrate your day in English. Like, you know, if you're making coffee in the morning, you're like, I am pouring hot water. The coffee smells strong, you know? Or, you know, I am walking to work. The sun is shining. You know, just these little things.
Right.
And it sounds simple, but it really does help to train your brain to think in English.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another big one is don't worry too much about grammar.
Especially at the beginning.
Yeah, especially at the beginning. You know, focus on communicating your message.
Yeah.
You know, don't get bogged down on the rules.
Like, are you using the present perfect correctly or?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The past perfect.
Yeah, because the more you focus on the grammar, the more you're going to hesitate.
Right.
And the less fluent you're going to sound.
And they also talk about, you know, if you don't have somebody to practice with, you can still practice by yourself.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
Like, you know, talk to yourself in the mirror.
Talk to the mirror.
Describe your surroundings.
Yes.
You know.
Or even just, like, you know, read aloud.
Read aloud. Yeah.
You know, from a book or a magazine.
Anything to get those, like, speech muscles working.
Yeah, to get comfortable with the sounds of English coming out of your mouth.
Exactly. Exactly. And then they talked about shadowing.
Ah, shadowing. Yeah, this is a great technique.
This is so great. And we've talked about it on the show before, but it bears repeating because it's so effective.
Yeah, and for those who might not know, shadowing is basically just listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say.
Right, so like you could put on a video, on YouTube or a podcast or watch a movie.
Yep, anything.
And just like try to imitate.
Yeah, imitate the pronunciation.
The rhythm, the intonation.
Yeah, the pace.
Exactly. And this really helps you kind of like internalize those sounds.
It does, because you're not thinking about the grammar, you're not thinking about the vocabulary.
You're just like mimicking.
You're just mimicking. And, your brain is starting to absorb those patterns.
Right. And it's also really good for like, getting that natural flow of the language.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes when you're first learning English, you tend to speak in this like kind of robotic, choppy way.
Yeah, it can sound a little unnatural.
Very unnatural.
But shadowing helps to smooth that out.
Yeah, exactly. And they also talked about keeping your sentences simple.
Oh, yeah.
Like especially when you're starting out.
Yeah.
Don't try to create these really long, complicated sentences.
No, because that's just going to lead to more hesitation, more overthinking.
Right.
It's like break it down into smaller chunks.
Smaller chunks, exactly. And the other thing that they emphasize, which, is so important, is embracing mistakes.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Because mistakes are inevitable.
They're inevitable, and they're actually, like, really valuable.
They're how you learn.
So, reframe it in your mind that, like, a mistake isn't a failure. It's actually a sign that you're pushing yourself,
Yeah, that you're stretching your boundaries.
Exactly.
And that you're growing.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
So, embrace those mistakes, learn from them, and move on.
And the last kind of, like, overarching tip that they gave was, like, immerse yourself in English as much as possible.
Oh, yeah. Immersion is key.
Listen to podcasts, watch movies, read books, anything that you enjoy.
Yeah. Surround yourself with the language.
Yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't even have to feel like work.
No. If you like watching movies, watch movies in English.
Yeah.
If you like listening to music, listen to music in English, And they also had a very specific exercise.
Oh, yeah.
Or like challenge, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
That they called the spontaneous speaking challenge.
Okay, yeah.
It's very simple.
Yeah.
Basically what they did was they gave each other a topic, and then they had to talk about that topic for 30 seconds.
Okay.
Without stopping.
Without stopping. Wow, that's tough.
So no, like, long pauses, no, like,
Okay.
ums and ahs.
So you just have to keep talking.
You just have to keep talking, yeah.
Even if you're not sure what to say.
Even if you don't know the exact words.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, the example they gave was, like, Julia, one of the hosts. Her topic was her morning routine.
Okay.
So she just kind of, like, described everything she does in the morning.
Right.
Like, wakes up, stretches, drinks water, brushes her teeth.
Yeah, all the usual stuff.
Yeah. And then Jason, the other host, his topic was his favorite hobby, which is playing guitar.
Oh, okay, cool.
And he just, like, talked about how he likes to play guitar to relax, how he usually practices in the evening.
Yeah.
How he enjoys learning new songs, things like that.
Right.
And it was really interesting to listen to because, like, they weren't trying to be perfect,
Yeah, they weren't trying to use fancy vocabulary or complex grammar.
Right. They were just trying to keep the conversation flowing.
Yeah.
And it was really, like, I don't know, it was just really effective in demonstrating how you can, like, speak naturally,
Yeah, it was a great illustration of that stop thinking, start talking principle.
Exactly. So the last thing that the video talks about is, like, some mindset shifts.
Okay.
Kind of like changes in the way you think about learning English.
Right, because your mindset can really impact your progress.
Absolutely.
So what are some of those key shifts?
So the first one is this idea that, like, confidence comes from action, not from waiting until you feel confident.
Right. So a lot of people think, I'll start speaking English when I feel more confident.
Right.
But actually, it's the opposite.
Yeah. You build confidence by speaking.
Exactly. So don't wait until you feel confident. Just start speaking.
Who's not speaking?
Yeah. And the mistakes will happen.
They will.
But that's okay.
Yeah, that's part of the process.
Exactly. The other mindset shift is, let go of perfection. This ties back to what we were talking about before.
Right. Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect. Native speakers make mistakes.
Right.
So don't put so much pressure on yourself to speak perfectly.
Yeah, just focus on communicating your message.
Exactly. And view those mistakes as opportunities to learn.
Exactly.
Not as failures.
Right. And the other mindset shift is, stop comparing yourself to other people.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
Because, everybody learns at their own pace.
Everyone has their own journey.
Exactly. So, just focus on your own progress.
Yeah. Compare yourself to where you were yesterday or last week or last month.
Right.
Not to other people.
Exactly. And the last mindset shift is embrace the discomfort.
Oh,
you know? Like, it's okay to feel a little uncomfortable when you're speaking English, especially if you're still learning.
Right. It's going to feel awkward sometimes.
It is, and it's going to feel a little scary sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's actually a sign that you're growing.
That's how you know you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think that this video is so, packed with great advice.
It is, yeah.
Like, actionable advice.
Very practical.
Very practical.
Yeah.
And, I think the main takeaway, if you take nothing else away from this episode, it's stop overthinking and just start talking.
Yeah.
That is the key to fluency.
Absolutely. And every time you speak, even if you make mistakes, you're making progress.
Yeah.
You're one step closer to fluency.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I encourage you, if you're listening to this and you're learning English, try out some of these tips.
Yeah.
See what works for you.
Experiment.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you do to overcome this fear of speaking? How have you built up your confidence?
Yeah. How have you gotten to that point where you can just stop thinking and start talking?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think this is such an important topic, and I'm so glad that we were able to really dive into it today.
Me too.
And, I think it's something that we can all, continue to work on.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey.
It is. It is.
And it's a journey that can open up so many doors for you.
Absolutely.
Think about all the opportunities that become available to you when you can communicate confidently in English.
Right. You can connect with people from all over the world.
Yeah. You can travel more easily.
You can advance your career.
You can access information and knowledge that might not be available in your native language.
Right. Right.
So it's really worth the effort.
It is.
To put in the time and the practice to become a confident English speaker.
It really is. And, the world is becoming increasingly interconnected.
Yeah.
And English is, kind of the lingua franca.
It is.
So the more fluent you are in English, the more opportunities you're going to have.
Absolutely.
And the more you can, participate in that global conversation.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think that's, a really empowering thought.
It is.
To, think about all the doors that can open for you.
Yeah.
When you have the confidence to speak English fluently.
So keep practicing, keep speaking, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly. All right, well, that's it for today's deep dive.
Until next time.
Until next time.